person a long time ago. Chad, your experience and role both at Stevens and now at Grain on the private side, we're all now, I guess the three of us here are recovering former either politicians or our regulatory leaders. And as we talked this morning, it is about the role of private equity right now and the deployment of advanced networks and the advanced applications. And for those of us in the competitive industry, the new alliances and partnerships with private equity really is spurring this new generation of new entrants, new companies, new builds. And so I just wanted to kind of talk about how private equity is the X factor. But Jonathan, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit of what you're doing now and how you went from the public sector to the private, and any great principle or lesson you've learned.
Well, sure, yeah. I transitioned over running a trade association like you, which is always fun, the Wireless Infrastructure Association. And now I'm over at DigitalBridge, which has $72 billion in assets under management around the globe, 42 portfolio companies. We really built quite a machine, including here in the U.S., prominently featured here at this conference is Zayo and Extenet. They are, also joined by, we have data center assets, edge data center assets, small cells tower, largest U.S. private tower co-vertical bridge. So we have these converged solutions where we can operate, we can build scale. In the digital infrastructure business, we think that convergence allows us to offer more to our customers that they need with that sector focus, so we can exploit the convergence that we're talking about here at the conference. Yeah. And of course, it was really one of the most exciting things we did was to apply for some middle mile funding. Zayo won more than any other company in the country in the middle mile program for NTIA, nearly $90 billion, 10% of the pie to one company, three awards. No other company won more than one. So, we're off to a good start. I wish there was more middle mile funding. One thing we don't have is an ISP. So, my friends here are in better shape when it comes to BEAD connecting to end users, because we don't do that, but we're always looking for opportunities to, provide capital to be able to take advantage of that opportunity.
Ajit, this past weekend, Kansas City wins again. The Chiefs are on a roll. They like to make it close and exciting. But kind of share with everyone life after being chair of the FCC and what you're doing now.
I'm just glad to report that there is life after the FCC, after the 4 years I had in the corner office. But first and foremost, Chip, let me thank you for hosting this panel. Thanks to you and Angie and the entire team at INCOMPAS for all your leadership for the industry. It really makes a big difference to have advocates like you out there giving us a forum to talk about these issues. And as always, it's a pleasure to be on either side of my esteemed colleagues, Jonathan and Chad, very talented leaders at highly successful investment firms, and I have more to learn every day in this business, and that's thanks in part to all of their labors. So I'm Ajit Pai, a former chair of the FCC. I left in 2021 and joined Searchlight Capital that year. Searchlight is a firm relatively small and scrappy compared to DigitalBridge. We have about $12 billion assets under management, and we invest across different sectors from healthcare to financial services, but the backbone of the firm historically has been in TMT, tech, media, and telecom. And in that vein, we deploy some of our capital. We have a private equity buyout fund, an infrastructure fund, and also a credit fund. And we invest in a variety of telecom companies, some of which are here, Consolidated Communications and Ziply Fiber. We also invest in smaller platforms that are looking to leverage BEAD funding, like All Points Broadband in Virginia and WeCom in the state of Arizona. And we've done some deals sort of adjacent to that as well, data centers, fixed wireless companies, and the like. But one of the things I love about Searchlight and just private equity in general is that there is really a seamless transition, I think at least, from how and I dare say probably Jonathan and you too, Chip, thought about these issues in government and how you think about it now. Because if you think about it from a governmental perspective, what I found when I was running the agency was you're always just trying to understand the lay of the land. What is the market structure? who are the competitors? What are their strengths and weaknesses? What management teams are out there building and raising capital and deploying that capital? And that's pretty much what I do now, is trying to look out at the landscape, albeit with a private sector lens, of course, and trying to figure out who are the talented entrepreneurs out there who have a great plan, just need capital in order to execute on that plan. And so for me, it's been wonderful ascending the learning ropes of finance while at the same time trying to leverage some of the expertise that I hopefully developed at the agency. And the time has never been better, as you've been discussing on these panels. We're in the process right now of, I would argue, the greatest infrastructure build since the interstate highway system in the 1950s, or maybe even the electrification of the country in the 1920s. This is a time that's going to be remembered for next century for the decisions we make. So however small a cog we may be in this endeavor, it's a really exciting one, I think, for the nation. And it's kind of nice to know that you're doing some good while hopefully doing well.
Chad, you and I are neighbors, Arkansas, Mississippi.
Indeed,
and
indeed.
I don't want to say anything about the game
Please
this
don't.
past weekend, but tell us a little bit about your journey, Stevens, to Grain. Not too long ago, I had the pleasure of attending a Grain summit, and really a talented team, tremendous leadership. Tell us a little bit about the companies that in your portfolio and your path from Stevens to Grain.
Okay, happy to. Well, thanks for having me, and I'm very humbled to be next to these two guys here. If you can't tell, I appreciate the invite. So I've been investing effectively in the telecom space for about 25 years. Started out at Alltel, which is prominent here in the sense that Windstream and Unity are both children of that experiment, and then went to the Stevens family and was an investor for them in a variety of different platforms. Clearwave being an example, Hargray another example in the telecom space, and then also a banker to the space. Worked on over $100 billion worth of telecom deals, primarily focused on a lot of the constituent companies in this space: rural, competitive fiber operators, telcos, cable operators, and so for 20 or so years have kind of seen the patterns of expansion, consolidation amongst rural operators, and various flavors of government programs, BTOP or RDOF or all the different flavors of it. And yeah, this is what we're about to step into is unprecedented, right? I mean, in comparison to any of those along that time period. So it's a very exciting time to be in the space and to be an investor in the space and to own assets in this space. So I, about 6 years ago, moved to Grain Management. We're a sector-focused investor. We've got about $8 billion of assets, and we're laser focused on the telecom broadband ecosystem, right? And we look at it from a network perspective. We think about how a phone call or a bit of data moves from one spot to another spot on the globe, and then looks at that network and look for investment opportunities along it, and then how valuations and just macro trends layer into that investment thesis, and then try to thematically pick spots along the way, and we'll trade in and out of them. So in the firm's history, we started out in cell towers. We have a multi-billion-dollar wireless spectrum portfolio that's kind of our play on the wireless side of the industry today. We own data centers. We've got services companies that are building and providing the labor that's very important, particularly in this space right now. Some of the software and technology that supports broadband and ISP providers. But our biggest investment sector, which is most relevant to this group, is the actual end operators, the fiber companies that provide the last mile connectivity. We have 5 different platforms today and a 6th on the way. Most of those are in the U.S., so represented in this group, or at least at this conference, Great Plains, Ritter, Summit, Hunter are domestic ones. We're about to acquire Quintillion in Alaska, and then we own Alaris in Brazil, which is kind of an international take on it. So that's us in our investment space.
So $42 billion combined with all the other funding that came out of the pandemic. And before I get into that, I don't know if y'all remember, as we entered into the pandemic, then Chairman Pai called all of the association heads, convened everyone, which is really I think one of the most effective uses of power and leadership is the power to convene. And Chairman Pai convened us. So, when the FCC chair calls, you always answer and
It was an invitation.
But then he challenged us, before any programs or any funding or any assurances were made that later came legislatively and through the FCC to keep America connected. And really, I think it was one of the great moments of the industry that in the beginning of the pandemic, all of our companies made a commitment to the chairman because of his leadership to keep all of our customers connected, all of our schools, our hospitals, our businesses. And it really made, I think, a significant difference. And so before we get into this next stage, I did want to recognize what you did to convene and to challenge and to get a commitment from the industry. Now, because we're the competitive association, I wanted to be the first to take the pledge. So,
Yeah, that's right.
And it was something that I really appreciate about your leadership. But now, as you look from the outside in, and you look at this historic level of public funding, why do we need private equity? And what are the advantages of private equity when you have that large of an infusion of federal funding? So kind of talk about both the private side, the public side, and the roles that you see in the marketplace.
Happy to. And first, thanks for the kind words about that time. It was an awful circumstance for the country to be put in, but I think the broadband industry really stepped up. And so all of you deserve a ton of credit for what otherwise could have been an even worse situation where Americans weren't able to study at home, work from home, get health care at home, and those kinds of things. So really a testament to all of the work your members have done. In terms of the role of private equity, I actually see there being a tremendous symbiosis between the public funding that's coming down the pike and the role of private equity or other private investment that it can step up to the table. For one thing, in many cases, in any given state, the BEAD allocation in particular is not sufficient to fiberize, so to speak, all of the unserved and underserved locations in that state. And so private capital will have to be necessary to supplement that to the extent that you want to build fiber, residential fiber. Additionally, for better or worse, the NTIA guidelines specifically state that there has to be in any given state at least a 25% match. And that match can, of course, be derived from a variety of sources, but at least when we think about our equity capital at Searchlight, we think about capitalizing these companies for purposes of persuading the state that, yes, this is in fact a credible operator with skin in the game. And so additionally, we think that private equity has a tremendous role to play, even aside from the capital that we provide. All of us up here are investors. Capital is to some extent a commodity given how much there is in the system. But the real differentiators, at least we have found, is a true partnership with management. How do you build a build plan? What's your capacity to execute on it? Now, Searchlight is one of the largest residential fiber investors in the US through our various platforms. And so we have the ability to mitigate, for example, some of the supply chain difficulties that a smaller operator might otherwise encounter. We have an internal talent management team whose sole focus is to identify and fill management roles that are critical, like COO, all the way down to CHRO, those types of things. And we also help the company forge or improve commercial relationships with others in the value chain who might be critical to the success of the enterprise. Working with the Zayo or middle mile fiber provider, or building relationships with electric co-ops to leverage some of their substation fiber, those kinds of things. And so what we find is that partnership is really valuable to the smaller operators in particular, but any company that otherwise might attract a lot of capital but might not be able to execute. And so that partnership opportunity is something that we take really seriously at Searchlight. And for us, at least, it's been a pleasure working with our portcos to make it happen.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I completely concur with the chairman. As a minority commissioner.
I'm just Ajit.
I was about to say we have Mignon Clyburn here. We have a quorum of former FCC. We could.
That's right.
We might be a shadow government. We could.
3 votes. Should we do net neutrality right now?
Yeah, that's right.
So,
America,
you're right, they're very simple.
No.
You did not destroy the internet, for the record. I'm still alive and well, no matter what happens.
Tell your friends.
I can't, they're all too busy online. So I totally concur that, the private sector and the public sector work well. I forgot to mention I ran RUS during the Recovery Act.
That's right.
And, we put out a lot of funding out there, but despite all of this funding coming in, the vast bulk of capital comes from the private sector, and that's what we're good at. So I think private equity in particular, when you think about it, has some specialized skills. I've really been impressed. These are great companies we're sitting with, working with my colleagues at DigitalBridge, at how we're able to both identify and build on strong management teams and help those companies that might be struggling a little bit sometimes to find the full value that they have. I mean, it's a specialized access to capital through private equity that ensures that funds basically go where they belong and that the market prices reach where they are appropriately valued. We speed access to capital for companies that are working. We speed access to capital for companies that need it to grow. We increase competition, something near and dear to your heart. I mean, having that funding chasing each other, having really smart people like us competing for some businesses really, I think, brings out the best in them and enables them to build, where they're needed most. And the other thing about private equity that's so important is that we don't look at the sort of like public funded companies' quarterly demands. We're looking at long-term ability to build these companies in order to exit, obviously, but while we're doing it, companies like ours that are sort of specialized in their focus particularly are able to look at the long-term or longer term than a, say, publicly traded company in terms of how we build them up. And these are companies that take a long time to mature because it takes a vast amount of CapEx. It takes time for revenues to flow and to reach their maturity. And during that process, private equity, I've never seen a more sort of effective group that's able to manage those assets and ensure that they are really deploying those funds, both private and public, efficiently.
Chad, your portfolio is, I'm struck by its diversity. You have Spectrum Holdings, you have traditional incumbents, you have competitors, you have CLECs and enterprise and business data centers. So as you hear Ajit and Jonathan describe private equity from Grain's perspective, what is the core advantages that y'all provide into the marketplace?
Yeah, so I think particularly for us, because we are so laser focused on just one industry and the different touch points on it, I think it's really kind of sitting from an investor and a partner's perspective and identifying those themes and those opportunity sets across those different verticals and ways to cooperate amongst the portfolio companies and just the opportunities that we see between between those different threads, right? Because there's commonalities, but there's also differences between those. And I think that ecosystem or kind of that knowledge effect that we see within our portfolio, I think is unique. And you saw it at our CEO Summit a little bit, a few weeks ago, where you can get all these CEOs together and then have them compare notes on different parts of the industry or different challenges, and I think that's something that we definitely offer. I think, building on some of the comments earlier, which I agree with, obviously with all of those, I think the rigor that we bring as an industry from an analytical perspective, and it's probably less the three of us, but the teams behind us cannot be underestimated in terms of the discipline that brings to capital allocation. And sometimes I know for our portfolio companies that there's a fine line of being evasive or invasive or overly burdensome. But I think it's all with good intention and good outcome to really analyze, particularly in the context of what we're talking about here, both government programs and sifting through those programs, what's good, what's not good, what to take, what not to take, and then the markets and the expansion of those markets and what markets to go into and how to build those. And that process is something that we're working constantly with our portfolio companies on. We're getting really deep in the weeds on that. And I think that gets us collectively to a better outcome. And I think our portfolio companies would acknowledge that as well too, which is good for us, it's good for our portfolio companies, it's good for our investors, but it's also good for society and the social objectives that we're trying to attain as a society and as a government, because I think it's making every one of those dollars the most efficient it can possibly be and maximizing the impact that is generated from those dollars.
I'm thinking through different questions, and so as we talk about this, I'll stay on the subject of the private and what we're seeing on BEAD and the public funding coming into the marketplace. One of the issues that is being raised by a number of our companies in the next round is the requirement on a letter of credit. The question is, will that so encumber a company's either debt or equity stack and investment strategy and build strategy in a way that may be an unintended deterrent for companies to actually bid and build? So talk through the letter of credit issue a little bit, and maybe some solutions that we could advocate to the NTIA and to our states as we go through this process. I don't know if you want to take it first, or if you want me to start at the other end first.
I guess they're happy to have me. The letter of credit, no doubt, is really a burden. The problem with it is it ties up capital that ISPs could use to build, and I'd be curious to hear how you're experiencing it. Of course, we have a bit of experience with Zayo because we had to do the letter of credit, and a big company like Zayo with a great credit is able to do it. But even for us, it's just a lot of work and it's a lot of expense. Yeah. And it ties up capital because we have a lot of projects beyond the ones that are being funded by the government that we don't need to be, tying up that amount of collateral with that. And, we also have to pay interest and fees on these things. The banks wanted to start right away, before we'd even had any money in the bank. Imagine that, bankers trying to do that. And that's on top of the match amount. It's on top of, these grants are taxed. I think it's absolutely a deterrent. It'll definitely slow deployment while those funds are tied up. I don't think that's the purpose of it. I think that it's better for large companies, like a Zayo, than it would be for a little tiny company that just doesn't have access to the kind of credit we do or the relationships with the banks, or doesn't have the collateral that they can pose. So in that sense, it doesn't enhance competition, which can be okay when you're a big company. On one hand, it kind of separates the wheat from the chaff a little bit, but I think it's not fair. I think there's other ways, as you pointed out, Chip, that we could ensure that only financially viable companies are competing. Performance bonds come to mind, a much cheaper way to do it. Having a rigorous financial analysis is another. When I was at RUS, we had to throw out the vast bulk of the applications for Recovery Act funds. We had 30 billion in applications and gave out 3 billion in awards, but frankly, we didn't have a lot of extra competition because 27 billion was basically thrown out because they were not financially feasible or technically feasible. And it wasn't because of a letter of credit. We were able as a bank to evaluate the financial feasibility as well as the technical feasibility of their projects. So there needs to be that kind of analysis done rather than forcing companies to put up very costly capital and pay these ridiculous fees in order to prove it out. There's cheaper ways to do it in more effective ways, I think.
Ajit?
I would agree with everything Jonathan said. And I certainly understand the motivation behind the letter of credit requirement. You want to make sure, from a governmental perspective, that subsidies are allocated to credible operators. But I think Jonathan is absolutely right that there's a one-for-one reduction in working capital, which is critical for some of these companies, especially smaller competitive companies that don't have the scale, or in some cases don't have the discernible cash flows that a larger, especially a publicly traded company, might, and so that's a problem. Secondly, I think it also inadvertently undermines one of the hopes I think that many of us have through the BEAD program is that you'll have competition to provide, to get the funding and then ultimately to provide broadband services in a particular area. If you start weeding out some of those companies, essentially you're going to be left with maybe one or at most two people bidding on a particular area. And so from a state perspective, if I were state broadband director, I'd want a lot of different applications coming in purporting to serve as many unserved and underserved as possible. And those folks might get weeded out through the letter of credit program. I would also add that this is another area where, obviously preaching my own book, but I think private equity can really help, because if you think about the entire purpose of the letter of credit requirement is to say, are these credible operators? And to the extent that a company can come to the table and say, look, we may be small, we may be nascent, but on the other hand, we are backed by DigitalBridge or Grain or Searchlight, whoever, and we have an ironclad financial commitment that their equity capital is going to be put on the balance sheet from day one. You don't have to worry about us being a fly-by-night operator. That kind of addresses the problem. And so I have to think that NTIA at the end of the day will give a little bit more flexibility, recognizing that the Encompass members, those are the ones who are going to solve this problem. Those are the ones who are going to be weeded out with the requirement as it currently stands.
Yeah, totally agree with all those comments. I mean, I think this is yet another example of, blunt instrument from a policy perspective. I mean, and BEAD's full of it, right? The Buy American provision, the, labor laws, I think with the Buy American, I think we're hopefully past that. Hopefully this will get solved in an appropriate way with some of the suggestions that you guys, because it's good intentions, but it's not the desired, policy tool to achieve that. And so hopefully between now and then, either the feds or the states will come around on this. But if they don't, we'll work through it. Again, this is, I think, the advantage of private equity to be able to navigate this. I'm confident with it. Our portfolio companies will be able to come up with solutions. One of those is because we have a big portfolio, we can cross-collateralize some stuff, and there's some solutions there. But again, they're tying up capital in a way that's not efficient. And I think also, just even from the bank's perspective, I don't think this is good for anybody, right? I mean, we're talking about the middle mile grant. So we're buying Quintillion. They got the largest single grant, not in the aggregate, but about $90 million. And they went and got a letter of credit from Wells Fargo. Presented that to the NTIA that's backed by the Department of Commerce. They came back and said, because of the Weiss rating of Wells Fargo, that's no good, you have to go find somebody else. This is the 4th largest bank in our nation. Yeah. It's been bailed out by the federal government in the past, and their credit is no good. Wow. Yeah. Like, there's a disconnect here from a policy perspective. And then even from the banker's perspective, they don't want to do this either, right? It ties up their capital ratios, which again is the other side of the government, requiring all these capital ratios at the bank. And so it's just a governmental ineptitude as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, there's a lot of red tape, as you pointed out, beyond even this that you deal with BEAD. But then we have the municipalities to deal with, and we really appreciate the leadership of Encompass, Chip, what you're doing on municipal franchise fees, on railroad crossings that are excessive and burdensome and delaying the build out for some of our larger runs. I mean, it's a difficult environment alone. So we need voices like yours out there trying to clear some of these hurdles that make it difficult to do what the government really wants to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your compliment to Encompass and our advocacy, but really the 3 people, former commissioners, on the stage and the audience, and maybe we have a quorum to go ahead and vote down the letter of credit right now. But y'all did a lot of work from the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee during y'all's time of One Touch Make Ready, of trying to streamline the deployment, the small cell order. We're continuing those fights of now trying to, cross the railroad, which is oftentimes the symbol of the digital divide and the real demarcation and the digital divide in so many cities in our country. But we find just extreme delays and unreasonable, outrageous fees being charged to cross the railroad. And so we continue the battle to make sure that we can deploy as fast as possible at the lowest cost as possible. And so as we talk about this, again, because we're in this once in a lifetime build of where we're replacing all of our old networks, whether that's in the sky with satellites and going to low Earth, whether it is our mobile networks with 4 to 5G, from copper to fiber, from asymmetrical to symmetrical networks and capacity. It really is the boom, the kind of the golden age of fiber. But we've seen this before. Encompass started in 1981 as the long distance industry emerged, and the new fiber long distance and internet backbone networks were built. Then after the 96 Act, we had the boom and the bust. We've had all of the wireless generations of building, and usually there's a build where we have a lot of new competition and new entrants, and a multiple set of funders and companies, and then there's consolidation. How long does the build stage, do y'all think, continue? And at what point would you see more of a consolidation? So the build to buy cycle. Any brave forecast of where the market is headed? Chad, I'll let you go.
Okay, yeah. So I think, well, in some ways, I think this is never going to stop, right? I mean, it depends on what the goal line that we're trying to achieve here. I think there's, going to be a continual expansion of networks for our society, the capacity, all that. I think this is a long, long game. But if you think kind of the near-term build here of this push around BEAD, I mean, it's a 5-ish year, 5 to 7 year type push is kind of the real hard push through BEAD and some of the other programs. But I think once we get to the end of that, we'll have to stop, pause, reassess, and I think what we'll find is BEAD has been ineffective in internet for everybody as it's designed. There will be patches of our country that are not serviced, and we'll have to come up with new programs to then fund those areas and their build out. And then there's going to be the ongoing expense side of it as well too, which I think will be a discussion topic once BEAD is done, because unlike ACAM, which is a long-term funding mechanism, this is a one and done. The OpEx costs don't go away. They're much higher in rural areas. That's going to be a whole problem that we'll confront down the road as well. So that's, at least on the funding side, that's what I kind of see. And then on the consolidation side, again, being a banker to the space and kind of seeing the consolidation and the roll up on the ILEC side of things with Windstream, and then on the wireless side with Alltel over the years, I think there's patterns to look at historically and how this consolidation occurred, and I think those are good examples, particularly the wireless side. But that's a long game as well, too. I mean, this is going to take years and years and years because it's so fragmented, so many different companies out there. The deals themselves take months to both effectuate and then integrate. That just the sequencing of all that is going to elongate this pretty substantially.
I would agree with that, and I think that's part of the reason why, in my view at least, that a lot of these companies are well served partnering with infrastructure investors, because that pool of capital is typically more patient. The traditional private equity model is more, say, 3 to 5 years, maybe 5 to 7, but these networks are going to take, as Chad was mentioning, half a decade to get built out, and so you need capital that's a little more patient, and I don't think the public markets are going to be as tolerant. As Jonathan mentioned, it's a quarter by quarter, and capital allocation becomes very difficult if you're in the C-suite of a publicly traded company trying to explain, okay, by 2027 we promise it's going to be done. It's just a very, very challenging proposition. So I think here, PE or infra funds that can come to the table with creative capital solutions can really help a lot of these companies succeed in the long term, because I do think it's a long-term proposition that we're talking about. And in terms of consolidation opportunities, I would agree with that, if you build well and if you build in an area where the competitive dynamics and market structure are attractive, then I think there are any number of strategics or infra funds at the end of the road that would be willing and able to make an investment.
And another elephant in the room is the cost of capital, which is going up as interest rates rise, and it means that it's tighter. Liquidity's coming down, access to capital is tougher, and so the result is that vast sums that were raised in a different interest rate environment and some of it deployed are still out there, but they've had trouble finding the right targets. So I think that still multiples are probably higher than they would be if it hadn't been for the amount that was raised back when interest rates were lower that hasn't yet been deployed. But the fact is that this is a CapEx heavy industry, as we discussed, with delayed cash flows. And the result is that, private new investment is probably going to slow down, if anything, at least in the short term, while access to capital is difficult. And PE is going to have to be more selective going forward, because we need a higher rate of return, because we're competing with other capital that, with bonds, et cetera, others that are getting more. So I think that the funds are going to flow to those companies that are succeeding, and that kind of gets us into the consolidation. I mean, the companies are able to convert passings to subs. It used to be you pay for passings, but what we're looking at is, can you really do the marketing? Can you really get the customers at the end of the line and the penetration rates that you need? And we're seeing a lot of companies that are not able, to execute, that had high hopes, but aren't getting the penetration rates, weren't banking on, so to speak, the interest rates being as high, so their models might have been at a lower interest rate environment. And those that aren't sort of getting traction in the marketplace are good candidates for consolidation. I think we're at the early stages of that, but we do expect that there's going to be more sort of dislocation and things coming into the market. But at the same time, there's a lot left to build. I mean, there's a big TAM out there for new fiber builds. We estimate there's probably 18 million homes that aren't spoken for yet that could use fiber connection. No flags have been planted, so there is a long runway ahead. But for now, it's getting a little bit tighter, and I think that the capital is going to flow more to experienced operators that are demonstrating success in the marketplace.
You know, we have around 260 companies that have come to the conference that are represented. Many are building networks, whether fiber or fixed, and the new networks. Many are small and building and local. Any advice that you would give to those types of companies that would want to find a private equity partner? What do they need to do? How do they approach any of the three of you, and what would you recommend or advise them to do?
Meet me in the back room after this. We'll start the dialogue.
I'll be right next door.
Yeah. It'll start with a conversation, and I think we can all do this, right? I mean, there's no one size fits all in how these things come about. I think we all have various capital buckets that are flexible, and so it may not be a square fit, but we've got a lot of different arrows, if you will, to pull out of the quiver and try. So whether it be a full buyout and partnering with a team or a family, or maybe it's a minority investment, or maybe it's debt capital. I mean, there's a lot of flexibility out there, and so I think it starts with what are your objectives as an ownership group or a management team, and what are you trying to accomplish? What do you really need? In a partner, and start with that and have some clarity around that, because then it's going to help us figure out what bucket or what tool or what security would be most applicable for you in general. So that's kind of a capital structure statement, or like a structuring statement. And then from there, I think the other things we're looking for are just really good operators that have a good team, that know how to do this. They've shown a pattern of being able to build successfully. There are a lot of companies out there, as we've alluded to, that have taken capital and just didn't have the experience base to really be able to deploy that capital, or they didn't have the contractor relationships, or couldn't navigate through the supply chain issues. And so we're looking at for operators that have that capability. So that's obviously, if you don't have that today and are thinking about this, this is a good time to kind of shore up that capability, and then present that when you do talk to us as a key part of what you're offering to us, because that's what we're looking for. We're not going to be the ones that are building the networks. We can help you analyze, help you navigate this, but we need a team with experience to be able to do that. I think that's probably the biggest factor.
I think that's absolutely right, and we love to work with entrepreneurs like that. And I think Chad put his finger on the most important thing, which is you figure out what it is you want to accomplish. Everybody might have a different objective, and then once you figure out what that objective is, what are the capital requirements that flow from that? And in terms of engaging a partner, definitely think about it. First and foremost, from our perspective, and I think the companies we partner with, they think about it too, is just alignment. Alignment has to be there, because this is a long-term endeavor. You're not just in it for 1 year and then you go your separate ways. I mean, it's a real partnership. And so alignment can flow, as Chad was saying, from the capital structure. If you, one of the things we prefer to do, if possible, is to have every shareholder, either rolling or management or us, in the same security. To the extent possible. So if you have really complicated capital structures with a pref and common, and then might have some debt thrown in, different shareholders might have different expectations, and that just creates challenges. Also alignment in terms of incentivizing management. If you want like a management incentive program or a MIP, which really helps give management a skin in the game too, that's really helpful. And then also in terms of the team that you're putting together, what do you want to accomplish? How aggressive a build do you want to do? Can the capital provider help you with that build? And then longer term, as I was mentioning earlier, is the capital provider somebody you want to help you partner in terms of getting supply assured and things like that. So there's a lot more than just money on the table from day one that you need to think about when you're looking at a potential investor. And I'd like to think that all of our firms really are oriented around that partnership model, which is much more calibrated, I think, to produce success for everybody, as opposed to the models where, ultimately in year 5, year 10, things just go south and there are recriminations and like. That's not what any of us, I think, want at the end of the day.
As that's all good advice, I think, from both of my colleagues. I mean, we would agree with that. And, just to maybe put a finer point on it, we have long experience like they do in this sector. So we've seen good operators. We look at comparative operations and how they work and performance across a long range of experience and have a lot of synergies with our portfolio companies like Zayo and Extenet here that we figure out where that alignment might be. And if there's a special alignment with our broader portfolio, that's a huge added bonus. But I'd say that one thing maybe is underappreciated just to add would be the ability, as I said, to convert passings to subscribers. I think that one of the underappreciated elements is marketing. And anybody can build these networks, but can you really sell it? Can you really build it where they're needed and then get the people to buy the product? So we're looking closely at penetration rates. How quickly do you execute and get those numbers up? How do you keep CapEx costs down? I mean, as we said, it's a very difficult capital environment where liquidity is precious, capital is precious right now. And so we need operators that know how to control their costs and do it effectively. And we can look at best practices across a wide range of companies we've looked at to see what the best numbers are. And of course, adjusted for all the different, environments. You've got aerial and buried and different environments that you're operating in that we would adjust those for. But, looking at projecting a long period, as we're seeing probably of inflation and high interest rates, we really need disciplined operators. And, if there are things that come on the market that aren't, then maybe we have the ability to bring some of that discipline in or some of the ability to scale with the relationships that we have. So that's kind of some of the elements I think I'd offer.
Now this is extremely helpful. Earlier today we had a couple panels on AI, and so I'm going to throw this in as our last question just to be relevant and current. As you look at network valuations and the multiples and the demand and the current capacity, this is a hard question. Do y'all see AI and all of those applications driving more demand and applications to the underlying network and thereby increasing the value of the network? And so as you look at the valuations 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, do you think that the multiples that we're now seeing in the marketplace will be sustained? Do you think it'll be higher? What trends do you see as you have this huge infusion of build, both private and public funding, and you have a transformational application possibly that will increase the demand and the need for the underlying asset? Any comment y'all like to give on that?
I think I think AI in and of itself, to me, great use case. There's going to be continued usage of all the parts of the network, but to me the most impactful part of it is the fact that we really weren't even talking about this 2 or 3 years ago. And I think that this is just an example of the undefined use cases that are out there on the horizon. I don't think this is a one and done. This will be the use case that drives the network in perpetuity. I think it's an example of all these other possible uses, whether it be VR or whether it be other things that we haven't even thought of yet that could be use cases on these networks. If the capacity is there and it's pervasive and it's got low latency. And so I guess the point being that I think AI is going to help and provide a base value, but it's really what even comes beyond that. And I think that collective uncertainty to the upside is going to buoy the valuations of any element of the network for a long time to come.
I think that's right. Yeah, we think it's accretive in the long run to what these companies are doing, and we do have a working group internally at Searchlight, which is studying how AI technologies can help improve what we do, but also help our portfolio companies succeed as well. And you're already starting to see some of it with AI being used to help do predictive models for build. What is the optimal way to build this network? Where do you put the distribution fiber? What's the optimal length for a particular drop? Those kinds of things. And then also on the customer service side, which is sort of a long-standing thing, but we have proliferation of things like ChatGPT. Can you train the AI in a closed model in a way that makes your customers have a much better experience and reduce cost as well? So we're just at the tip of the iceberg here. I think it's going to be really exciting to see where this goes. And I think in the long run, it's all buoyed by the fact that the one common thread of the consumer experience since the dawn of the commercial internet is that we're always going to use the internet more. And so I think at the end of the day, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I don't know what world politics are going to look like. I don't know, agricultural trends, but I can tell you that bandwidth consumption is going to keep going up and to the right. And so we think that's one of the reasons why we're very bullish on fiber in particular, because it's a technology that has the ability to scale in parallel with consumer demand. And that's also what we're talking about primarily in these rural and underserved areas. That's what consumers want and deserve too. So I think all of us are investing where the puck is going, so to speak, in terms of internet access.
Yeah, I agree with both of the comments, and that it's a huge tailwind for telecom in general, and but this much data coming down, and the killer app, maybe we finally found the killer app for 5G. But it's not just 5G. Maybe we could sequence kind of how we see the AI impacting demand for telecom and data services. It's sort of filling up first at data centers. We own Vantage and DataBank and bought Switch recently, that are seeing incredible demand, just immediate, palpable. Some of the numbers we've talked about in our quarterly report. You've seen some analyst reports on that, and we can validate that we're seeing enormous demand there first. And then I think it goes next to the need to connect the data centers to some of the long haul and large, fiber connections first, and then it sort of bleeds out more and more toward the edge. It's inevitable as users use it more. I mean, at this point, folks using ChatGPT aren't filling up the network, but as time goes on, we're going to see, I think, more and more traffic over fiber networks and more toward the edge. So edge data centers are going to be required. The whole data center industry will move more away from the center and outward toward where the customers are, and that will require deeper penetration of fiber as well as wireless. I mean, there's going to be a need for enormous capacity at the tower site. Fiber to most towers has already been accomplished, but some of those need to be upgraded. Another opportunity for the fiber industry, and a great opportunity for the tower industry. I think more equipment is going to be needed to deal with this. So I think it benefits the entire digital infrastructure ecosystem, but it's kind of sequential in terms of how that amount of demand flows. But right now, the question is like, what is the most difficult capacity to build? I mean, it's really difficult to find power right now for data centers to meet this demand. And so our capacity is quickly being eaten up by the hyperscalers that are worried about, are they going to have the capacity they need? And will we be able to build fast enough? And it takes time to build these fiber networks to connect all that as well. So this is a long-term, very beneficial tailwind for the industry that I think does make us happy we're in this sector. I'm glad we own a lot of capacity in data centers right now. It's been a good run, but it's just beginning.
Well, that is good news for our member companies and the companies that are building the digital infrastructure of the future and the applications that they enable on top. This has been a tremendous conversation and very helpful. I think we have maybe time for one question from the audience or two. I would like to note, just real quickly, Jonathan worked for Senator Daschle. I worked for Senator Lott. This is Ajit, of course, Republican, two Republicans, Democrat, but I'm wearing blue socks and he's wearing red socks. And
we're bipartisan now.
Yeah, we're very bipartisan.
If you're participating in the BEAD program, you have to participate in ACP. If you participate in ACP, you have to do ACP reporting and broadband label reporting. And then we also have the robocall reporting that's rolling out. And that's on top of the existing USF system, which we all know is fairly complex. And so my question is, do you think that all this reporting could be something of a disincentive to participation in the BEAD program?
I mean, I can take a crack at it. I think as a first order matter, no, at least the companies we have invested in and that we have been working with, potentially investing in, they haven't seen it as that much of a disincentive thus far. That's not to say that all the compliance burden doesn't on the back end end up exacting more of a cost than anticipated, but at least when we do our work with the companies we invest in, first and foremost, what they're thinking about is, what is the build plan? What are the BEAD subsidies that can be leveraged for that? What can we reasonably expect in terms of penetration in ARPU? Can ACP help defray some of that cost for the consumer? And so the reporting the regulatory burden is a line item that we think about, but it's not the dog so much as the tail. I'm happy to say thus far that could change, but and hopefully to the extent that there is a regulatory burden that can and should be alleviated, someone at the FCC should look at that. So,
Someone should.
I know.
We got 3 votes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, ACP, of course, is might not exist in a few months. It's a requirement of BEAD, and then it's going to run out of money sometime probably in the first or second quarter of next year. And I don't see this current Congress in a good position to restore that. I don't even have a speaker right now. So, there's bipartisan support for it. But yeah, what's going on over there, Chip?
Yeah, neither
He
one of
didn't
you-
deny it. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. We could do worse than Speaker Pickering.
You don't have to be in the House. So maybe you do. We'll see. But it's hard to see how Congress is going to get it together to restore ACP. I really hope they do. It'll be a huge blow to a lot of households if they can't. But in this current fiscal environment and political environment, it's going to be tricky to get that through Congress.
ACP is actually, we're hearing from our companies that it's helping them make a build case into areas that are difficult historically to have a rate of return. And now they're doing builds for the entire community because of ACP. So we're working hard in Washington, trying to work through a difficult Congress to continue the funding.
Yeah.
Chad?
Echo all the comments. In terms of pain points on BEAD, it's not the top of the list. I mean, some of the other points we've already talked about are more prominent in it, but it's just another kind of cost of doing business, I think, that'll, just burden the teams we'll work through.
Listen, I really appreciate all of y'all making the effort to be here. It means a lot to our membership in the show, and we're grateful for all of y'all's work and service. So thank y'all for being here.
Thank you.